Welcome to the Midlife Masculine Podcast. My name is Dhruv Sethi, and join me on this journey of becoming an objective, independent, self-sovereign thinker and doer. The masculine maintains structure in our families and society, even when it's underappreciated. This always begins with the acquisition of knowledge, ancient or modern, obscure or mainstream. Regardless, we will acquire knowledge together on this show. Find us on mlmpod.info and all major podcast platforms. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell. I want to take this time to wish all my listeners a happy new year. Welcome to another episode of the Midlife Masculine Podcast. Paul Zolman is a love language linguist. Paul is the international best-selling author of The Role of Love. Now, Paul has created a new way to demonstrate the principles of love languages. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Dhruv. Glad to be with you here today.
Great to have you, Paul. And before we get into the meat of the episode, what is a love language linguist?
A love language linguist is someone that knows the five love languages. Five love languages actually was a book that was written by Dr. Gary Chapman. He was a reverend, a pastor of a church, and he said that those love languages reconcile to the life of Jesus Christ. So the five love languages are gifts. He had the gifts of the Spirit. Service, he served everybody. Words, we say nice words to people, kind words, one another. We have the scriptures to benefit from that as far as Jesus Christ goes. He touched people's eyes so they could see and their ears so they could hear. So touch is one of those love languages. The whole theory is time is another one, and then gifts. The whole theory is, Dhruv, that every person has a primary love language, some way that they like to be loved. And so he distilled it into five different love languages, and that's so one might be a primary love language, or there might be a secondary love language, but there's usually one or two that are really dominant love languages, and that's the whole theory behind that.
And to figure out what our love language is, we can just Google the love language and just do a quick test, right? And they'll essentially tell us our primary and secondary love language.
That's the old way to do it, Dhruv. I have a new way. I think it's a lot better. You don't have to say, "Excuse me, could you pause this relationship for a minute so I can have you take this survey so I know how to love you?" That's awkward. What I do now is that I put all the love languages on a cube. And I'm holding up the cube right now. It's about 1 inch by 1 inch cube, and each side has a love language on it. So whatever it is that you roll that day, you practice giving that away all day that day. While you're giving it away, you're using your observation skills. Those observation skills are watching for people that light up. When they light up, now you've discovered, without having to take survey, you've discovered what their primary or secondary love language might be. You're just going to take a mental note. That's what they like. And then you can deliver that over and over again to them.
So kind of like an iterative process where you learn about them over the course of time, rather than doing a test where an online test essentially tells you what it is. So you discover them in the process.
Absolutely. So it really is true to the fact, because you're watching their body language, you're watching their whole reaction. The test can be skewed. I mean, if you know you're taking a survey, you can say, well, maybe this, maybe that, and it really can be skewed that way. You can't skew body language. You can't skew the light up. There's no way to do that. It's really a surprise, a very nice surprise for people that light up. And when they light up, bingo, you got it.
Okay. So before we move on, I'm just going to list those five love languages again, and please correct me if I'm wrong. The first one was quality time. So perhaps quality time is one of our love languages, where we like our romantic partners, family or friends spending quality time with us. And that's how we feel love, number one. Number two is words of affirmation. Number three, we like them buying gifts for us. Number four, perform acts of service for us. And number five, affection or physical touch towards. Did I get them right?
You got all five of them. But Drew, I really had a problem with the direction. I came from a family of abuse, so I really didn't know the love languages that way at all. All I knew was how to walk over people while they're talking. I knew how to put people down so that I would be elevated. I knew how to talk smack talk all the time. I knew how to be verbally abusive or physically abusive. I learned all that as a child. And unfortunately, my parents taught that to me. So I had to unlearn a lot of that And really, I didn't get the love languages as Dr. Chapman wrote it. So what I realized is that Dr. Chapman, I felt like he changed direction in the book constantly, almost every single page. Well, what direction is going now? Is it to them or is it for me? And it really, really bothered me that way because I couldn't figure it out. And so this new way, there's just two instructions for the cube. You roll the cube every day. Whatever comes up, that's the love language you practice giving away all day that day to everybody, every single person. You're giving it away. No longer, Drew, is it about you or me. I'm sorry. And I mean, you probably are totally disappointed because of that. But when you give it away and you make somebody's day, it's great satisfaction that you get that you made somebody's day. To me, that's love. That's what giving love away or receiving love is. It's satisfaction that you're doing something wonderful for someone else. And that is going to be self-love, or it's going to be love for them. And it's kind of a double-edged sword there, that you're going to get both at the same time. If you make somebody's day, they're going to spread that goodness to their circle of influence as well and make their day better. And the same thing will happen at Anchor. You make somebody miserable, they're going to make everybody else around them miserable, and they're going to call it a bad day, and they're going to make everybody's day bad.
No, I totally agree with you. Giving love or expressing it to someone else, seeing a smile on someone else's face, making their day, knowing that they're going to make the days of 10 more people after you, that is a special feeling. I totally agree with you. I listened to your audiobook, and I have to say that it was very simple, very practical. And what I liked the most about it is that you related it to your life and your upbringing, which I think would help men understand this a lot better. It'd be a lot easier for them to understand it. And it's a very short book as well, so I strongly recommend men either downloading it as an audiobook or picking up a hard copy. It could save their romantic relationships.
Great. Thank you, Drew, for doing that. The discovery that I had of this was really about 15 years ago. And I was really kind of having a midlife crisis. This anger that I had a lot of residual anger left over from my childhood. And what I found was what was happening, Drew, was that I'd be stacking one annoyance on top of another annoyance on top of another, until it actually became I'd blow. I'd have this flash of anger that would come out. I would never know when it was going to happen because I couldn't remember how many times I've been annoyed, but there was one straw that broke that camel's back. And it just, as I got to that point, I would flash. It would happen in public and it would happen in private. And it was just really embarrassing. I don't know if you've ever gone swimming and someone has an accident in the swimming pool. Everybody scatters. It wasn't me, it wasn't me, it wasn't me. And you don't want it to be you, but you scatter. And I had that same feeling. I was repelling people, that people were going away from me. Even my family would go away from me. I did not want that to happen anymore. But unfortunately for my first marriage, it was too little too late. And it really was contributory to the demise of my first marriage. I had 8 children and there were 5 left in the house. I had primary custody of those children. And what happened is that this became a midlife crisis. So what I did in that midlife crisis, I thought, I'm going to have some fun. Just like a lot of people in the midlife crisis say, I'm going to have some fun. I'm going to do something fun. And so what I decided is that when my ex-wife had the children on her weekend, I was going to have a date. And I'd find these people online, and they'd live in a different city. I would live in a different city. We'd decide a city to meet in, and we had what I call a destination date. I had a great time. I went to Daytona Beach, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, Atlanta, Georgia, Nashville, Tennessee, Kansas City, New York City, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, Snowflake, Arizona, Cabo San Lucas. Went to all these places and a few more having a date. Drew, it was like the lyrics of the song, looking for love in all the wrong places. I didn't find anything. I had a great time, but I didn't find anything. I spent a lot of money. I spent more than $10,000 on this midlife crisis, having dates all around at least North America. And it was fun, but I thought I had a line on someone, and so I moved to Phoenix, and it just didn't turn out. So here I am, all alone. I had 3 children left in the household. My ex-wife decided she wanted primary custody after 3.5 years of being on her own, and she wanted primary custody, but she was moving in with her own parents. I thought, you know what? I never had that opportunity. I'm number 10 of 11 children. I didn't have that opportunity to see my grandparents very often at all. I had one grandmother that was 350 miles east, one grandmother that was 350 miles west. We were kind of right in the middle, and both my grandfathers had passed away before I was even born. So I didn't have that opportunity for much association with grandparents. I thought this would be perfect for those children, those last 3 children, to get to know their grandparents, at least on the mother's side. So I relinquished custody. Now I'm really all alone. In that time period, my older sister, thinks that I'm lonely. She calls me up and says, I have this neighbor that I want to introduce to you. And my sister was living 7.5 hours away. I said, sister, you know what? I'm done with destination dating. I didn't find anything then. Why do I think that I would ever find it now? I've been doing it for 1.5 years. Nothing's materializing. And as number 10 of 11, you kind of have to do what your big brother, big sister say to do. So I said, okay, well, I will email this woman. And so I'm emailing this woman, and I'm getting brave. So by the fourth or fifth interchange, I'm starting to ask, well, how many times have you been married? That's a pretty heavy question when you're just having an email conversation. And so she wrote back and she said, counting the 5 that are buried in the backyard? And I started roaring with laughter. I thought, this is the funniest lady I've ever met. I've got a live wire. I've got somebody worth pursuing. She's got a sense of humor. She got has some personality. I want to pursue this a little bit. So we started getting a little bit closer, and then I decided to move up there. We became serious. When we became serious, now it's time for big brother approval. So I go 300 miles north with her into my brother's house. First thing my sister-in-law does is pull her aside and say, the only emotion that the Zolman family learned growing up was anger. At first I denied. I said, you made me mad. And I thought, I'm busted. She really nailed it, and we're still getting mad and angry. And I realized, Drew, that at that very moment, that there's an opportunity here, a midlife crisis type of opportunity, that I can change that perception of the Zolman family. And so I started to. I realized I was in a culture of anger that had angry vocabulary. They had angry humor, sarcasm, and putting people down, and just all that smack talk and everything else that goes with the angry culture. I didn't want to do that anymore. If that was the perception, I don't want to pass that on to my children. I don't want to pass it on to my grandchildren. I want it to stop. I want the generational thing to stop right now, here and now. Stops with me. So I started reading a book called The Color Code. It was more about personality tests, and it was okay. Then I moved to the 5 love languages. As I move into the 5 love languages, I've gone through the book 4 or 5 times. Like I told you, Drew, I'm not getting it. From where I came from to what he's suggesting wasn't working for me. Dr. Chapman, Drew, suggests that, well, if I guess, Drew, what your love language is and cater to that, we're going to be buddies. I'm a bad guesser. It wasn't happening up until that time, and it still wasn't going to be happening. So the second thing that Dr. Chapman has said, well, if you take this survey, then you can find out what your love language is. Well, Drew, what am I supposed to do with that? Advertise? I could get buttons and put it on my shirt and say, hello, I'm Gifts. What do you have for me today? Awkward. I'm done with awkward. I'm really done with awkward. All that repelling people in those angry spouts and doing those awkward things from my past, I didn't want to do awkward anymore. Said there's got to be a better way. So I just realized that at that time that games, just any type of game, brought our family together. Even as dysfunctional as we were as a family growing up, there was still a smack talk, there was still a put downs, there was still a very aggressive competition, and there was still the strategy. All those things in the angry culture, there's still that there. But games brought us family together. So I contacted Dr. Chapman and asked him if he's licensing those little pictures that they had for the love languages. And his attorney wrote back and said, no, we're not doing that at this time. So I contacted my own attorney here, and told him the idea. He said, theory, like the love language theory, is not copyrightable. Application is. So they didn't have it as a game, so that's how I made it into a game with the cube. And I've got all the love language on. There's 6 sides on the cube. The 6th side actually is what I call surprise me. It's a hand holding a question mark. So on that day, when you roll that on that day, you're watching for opportunities to do random acts of kindness. But over a 30-day period, you learn all 5 love languages so that you too can become a love language linguist. I know it's a sexy title, Drew. You want it? You want to put it on your resume. When you put it on your resume and you go to that employer, the employer's going to say, what the heck is a love language linguist? And you're going to say, I just love people. That employer wants their customers loved, and they want a loving environment within the workplace. Your resume should rise to the top just because of those 2 things.
Yeah, I do like the title. And for those men on dating apps, they can use that as a profile title for sure. So it does sound like you broke some sort of a generational pattern or perhaps a curse. Sometimes we carry that, and you certainly broke that. Now, I want to ask you about men as well. So why do men struggle in expressing and receiving love?
Great question, Drew. And I think that it has to do with exactly what I went through when I was at my sister-in-law's house. I denied the fact that we came from an angry. And I think there's a lot of denial that men have. They want to be that macho. They don't want to appear weak in any sense. And I think that's part of our nature. Just part of the makeup that we have is that we need to appear macho because that's what men do. And we just want to be macho. And I think that's a struggle. One of the things that helped me through the struggle, Drew, and I'm not sure if you're Christian or not, it doesn't matter, but it's a Christian teaching that really helped me, and it's at the Last Supper. Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. And all the disciples, one by one, all of them, one by one said, Lord, is it I? And I think that if we say that question daily to ourselves, Lord, is it I? We'll have that's a humble enough feeling for ourselves to know that we have other things that we can learn. We don't know everything, but we have other things that we can learn. And I think that when we get to that point of asking that same question, Lord, is it I? That's that introspection we need to be able to have that ability to have that self-actualization moment, that then we can know where we're at. If we don't know where we're at, Drew, we can't set goals to improve. But that knowing where we're at any point in time is the ability to be able to set goals to improve from right where we're at. And I think that's difficult for a lot of men, trying to determine emotionally what their emotional intelligence quotient might be to know right where they're at. And that's hard for them to improve from that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's something about masculine nature, about us appearing strong, macho, showing certain emotions would be a sign of weakness. Now, I wouldn't say that men should show too many emotions, because sometimes it can make the opposite sex less attractive to the man. But I do think some form of healthy expression is good. And I think I can relate to you as well. You mentioned you had 10 other siblings. You're 11 in total. So probably it was very much about, speaking over other people, making sure that you had presence. Somewhere similarly, we're 3 brothers as well, and there's a lot of masculine energy, and so somewhere we need to speak over the other person as well. And over time, it becomes a habit. But like you're saying, at some point, we need to just sit still and introspect about why we are where we are and where we want to go from that point onwards.
Absolutely. And I think that midlife crisis for me was that realization that I need to become more loving. I don't want to become more angry. But I realized that I had to stop blaming my father for all the awkward moments. And it was about 35 years old that I stopped blaming him. Any kind of blame that we pass, it means that we don't have to change. We don't have to do a darn thing to change anything because it's their fault. Go talk to them because it's their fault. And rather than take responsibility ourselves for our own actions. That occurred for me, that paradigm shift or that aha moment, that epiphany, so to speak, was at age 35 for me. Hopefully we can teach children to do it a whole lot earlier, that to have that idea that they're responsible for their own actions, they're responsible for their own words, and then it would really, I think, it'd tamp down a lot of misbehaving, a lot of bullying that happens in schools, a lot of the violence that is going on in the schools and in the world today, if we can teach the children that they're responsible for their own behavior.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I also feel that when we take, I don't want to say start blaming ourselves, but rather take accountability for things that are happening in our own lives. Once we start taking accountability upon ourselves, then there's a great sense of relief as well. It's quite relaxing in some strange way.
Absolutely. I really believe that, especially if you're sending out love. If you're sending out love and that's your mantra to do that, now what you're doing, especially, and what the attitude change was for me, Drew, is that instead of being critical, that's part of the angry culture, that you're critical of everyone, everything, everyone. Instead of saying in my mind or out loud, what's wrong with that person? Now it's changed to the exact opposite. What's right with that person? What can I love about that person? And I'm looking the whole different direction. Now, instead of focusing on the 10 or 20% of that person that everybody has weaknesses, that 10 or 20% might be a weaknesses, or 80% or 90% of that person is good. And so now that I'm focused on the 80 to 90% instead of the 10 or 20%, I'm so busy, I forget to be annoyed. So no longer am I stacking annoyance on top of annoyance and getting to that flash of anger, but I'm stacking kindness upon a kindness upon kindness, getting to higher laws of love. Higher laws of love like charity, or like compassion, or like forgiveness. Goodness sakes, can you imagine somebody insulting, and then asking for forgiveness? Is it going to be granted? Probably not. But kindness on kindness on kindness on kindness gets to that point of empathy or sympathy or mercy and that forgiveness. That's kind of where we need to go there as a society, be more forgiving one to another.
I think you say very wise words, Paul. So let's give a bit more, a practical example. So if a couple, say, are arguing and the discussion is getting a bit heated from one person, so should the other person essentially try to stay calm and view that environment or that situation from a kind, loving eyes? And if one stays calm, then perhaps we can avoid any formal argument or altercation.
I think that's a great idea, Drew, and that's one way. The other way is to watch for what's right about that person, and if arguments happen within couples, it's because there's a communication problem. This cube can be a very good tool to help solve some of that communication problem. Because think about it, if you know all 5 love languages to give it away, that gives you a peripheral vision now that you can see it when it comes your way, and then you can respond appropriately. For example, if I'm physical touch and somebody sends words, you can say something like, oh, I see they're loving on me. It's not my primary love language, but I can respond back to that love that people are sending. And I know, Drew, in my whole life, I've missed a lot of opportunities where people were sending love my way. I didn't see it as love. I thought, well, that's nice, but it's not really love. Now you can see it as love, and then respond appropriately to that, even though it might not be your primary love language. And it's okay to share what your primary love language is, but I really like the idea of watching people light up. And that's the whole idea now. You're trying to make people's day, whether it's your significant other or any stranger. You could do it at a clerk at the grocery store. Doesn't matter who you're lighting up, try to light people up.
Very wise words, Paul. And this is the whole mission of this podcast, is to take midlife men or bring new knowledge to midlife men so that they can have another shot at life and really make a difference to their families and society at large. So very wise words. Thanks for that, Paul. And I want to move on to judgment, because you mentioned that in your book. So what is the relationship between judgment and love? Can you love and be judgmental at the same time, or not possible?
Again, let's go back to the spectrum. When you're judgmental, usually it's in a critical way. I would say that's more on the angry side. You're trying to make a decision for another person or make an assessment of another person when most of the time it's not none of your business. It's their choice. And I realized that angry people and in that angry culture, there were no boundaries, zero boundaries at all. So I really had to draw that boundary, more of a hard boundary for myself, because I was used to anything goes. And we're almost to a society of anything goes. That's an angry culture. There's that boundary that you can't be looking over your shoulder or looking to the side at what someone else is doing and make a judgment call and make a criticism or anything like that. It's not your call. It's out of your lane. Stay in your lane. Your lane is to send love out and respond appropriately when it comes your way. It has nothing to do with being critical of that person. What I found, Drew, was that I realized that first annoyance was about somebody else. Hardly ever was I ever annoyed about myself. How would that be? Well, I was annoyed about myself for one time so bad that I didn't talk to myself for 3 days. How's that going to go?
Yeah, you need to talk to yourself sometimes, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Drew. I appreciate that wise advice.
Yeah, just coming back to the judgment side of things, I can relate to that. When I went through my divorce many years back, that divorce was quite bitter. And after divorce went through, I went through a period where I didn't trust women, except my mother. It was the only woman I trusted. But other than that, I didn't trust women. I was very judgmental. I somehow managed to find faults in everybody or whoever I was dating at that time. And also, as a result, I wasn't getting any love from any of the women. Of course, I could date and it would be enjoyable for a few weeks or months, but I wasn't finding that romantic love, and equally I wasn't giving that romantic love. It was almost like I was stuck somewhere until I met somebody, and I think she was a catalyst back in 2020 that changed my perception. And she eventually dumped me. And you never know why you get dumped when you're getting dumped, but it takes about a year to figure out why you're getting dumped. And I realized after about a year why I got dumped. And it was because she was expressing so much love to me, but I didn't know how to receive it and therefore couldn't give it back. And I had some sort of an epiphany as well. And I realized that after reading certain books that I need to change my ways. I need to open up a bit more. And guess what happens? Once you start expressing love, then people show you love in their own way. Whether it's a clerk in a shop or somebody at your workplace, you start experiencing it a lot more. So I think that experience changed my life a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, Drew. And I appreciate that personal experience. Mine is very, very similar. That until I realized that anger was a problem, until I actually had that I agreed with my sister-in-law, because I got angry when she said, we're angry. We're angry. We definitely are angry. When I realized that really was kind of a generational thing that had been passed on, maybe we could call it a tradition of our fathers, or tradition of our forefathers that had been passed on, that is incorrect. That it's not a good idea to just have this angry attitude about life. Because it's like, if you send anger out, it's like a boomerang. That's coming right back at you. And when you send a boomerang out, you usually throw it up into the air. When it comes back, it has the gravity's G-force, and it makes it come a lot faster right back at you. You're not going to want to catch it. You're not going to want to have it hit your neck to chop your head off. You're not going to want any of that. But it comes back anger sent out comes back about 10 times worse than you sent it out. Why would anybody choose to do that? But we do it all the time. We send that judgment or that anger out or that criticism out all day long because we're trained by the media. That's what the media does. They do it, but we gotta change something up, or we're gonna have really a lot more troubles than we have in the world. I mean, we're already at war in several parts of the world. We gotta let's stop. Let's start using our head, being more decent to one another.
Absolutely. Not only are we in the midst of hot wars, but I think we are in the midst of a spiritual war as well. And what you say in your book and what you said on this podcast are very valuable, and it's something we should take note of and really start changing the way we live.
Absolutely. And I think that this is perfect for a midlife crisis too, that just learn how to love a whole lot better. If there's anything you can do in your midlife, up until that midlife, maybe you loved, but try to be 1% better per day. Each day, try to be just a little bit better. Maybe you're a loving person right now, but you just need to try to improve yourself. When I created this, Drew, like you, I was single, and I realized I have a lot of improving to do before I'm even eligible to be able to go out and find someone else to date. That I really needed to take care of what's my own business first, and get to the point that I felt like I could send out love. I could recognize love. That when I was single, that's when I created the die, and that's when I just wrote the book last year. So I'm married, happily married, been married for 6 years now. But just using this really has been very helpful for me to understand my wife and what she likes, and just be able to just take the mental note of what she likes, mix it up. The nice thing about the cube is that it provides variety in your life. If you pigeonhole someone in anything, I don't care what it is, you pigeonhole them, put them in a box that say you're only getting this kind of love. It's like giving them, you only have tacos for dinner every night. Every night. Oh, you get tired of it after a while. Change it up. Provide that variety is going to be the spice of life. Change it up, and the die will help you, or the cube will help you do that.
And where can people find or buy that die?
They can find the die on my website. It's roleoflove.com, ROLE of love.com. But the book for people international, it's probably better to do it like you did, Drew, and go ahead and go on Amazon. Just type in my name on Amazon, and then the book will come right up. There's an audio version of the book or the printed version. In addition to that, there's a journal. So if you want to keep track and keep your feet to the fire on that responsibility of loving every single day, the journal is perfect. Inside the journal, it has what you rolled, opportunities you saw to love in that way, and what you did about those opportunities. As little prompts inside the journal, I found, Drew, that when I looked at a blank page for a journal, my mind would go blank. I couldn't remember what I'd done that day. And maybe that's what happened with my mother or my grandmother or my grandfather. What I got for journal from them was a journal about the weather. The weather! 60 years ago. Who cares about what the weather was like 60 years ago? I would have loved to have a love journal from them.
Absolutely. Well, we're reaching the end of the podcast, but I always ask my guests for some takeaways. So what takeaways can you give my listeners who are typically midlife men?
Drew, there's just one thing that I'd really like to say, and it really comes from the Sound of Music. It's a classic musical. People heard it all over the world. But in that classic musical, Rolf, who's the delivery man that rides the bike and makes all the deliveries, is in love with the oldest Von Trapp's sister. And so he's there at their house, and she's up on the second story window. He starts to sing a song. And in that song come the lyrics, "Love in the heart wasn't put there to stay. Love isn't love till it's given away."
Fantastic. What a beautiful note to end the podcast on. Well, Paul, this has been very insightful. Thank you very much. And I strongly recommend to my listeners to read this book. It's a short book, small book, but it's very valuable. Thanks once again, Paul.
Thank you, Drew. Absolutely. Pleasure to be with you today.
You've been listening to the Midlife Masculine Podcast. Find us on mlmpod.info and all major podcast platforms. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit